Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to Matters of Public Importance right here on Channel 6. I'm yours, Gail Teixeira, Parliamentary Opposition Chief Whip for the People's Progressive Party, Civic, and the PPP. I'm very grateful to Bishop Edgehill, Member of Parliament, who took my place last week, and I hope you enjoyed the program. I was in Letham, and so I couldn't be here with you. So thanks, Bishop, for carrying on for me. On this program, we, as always, shall focus on matters of public importance, bring you information, discussions on issues and matters that are of concern to you, the Guyanese public, every Thursday between 12:30 and 1:30, right here on Channel 6. And as usual, before we get into the program, I remind you of the numbers you can use to call in, 225-0010 and 225-008. And remember, please, I can't take calls that numbers aren't showing up. So if you're unknown private, I regret. If you can get to another line, it would be good to hear your views. I always remind you that the Office of the Leader Opposition is open, 304 Church Street between New Garden and Peter Rowe Street, right opposite the Border Cricket Ground, so it's easy to find, and we have a big sign there and so on. So we're open Monday to Saturday, half-day Saturdays, and of course there are members of Parliament there. Dr. Luncheon goes in there 4 days a week, for example. Former Prime Minister Sam Hines is there, and of course the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jagdeo, goes in there. So we're there to serve you, the Guyanese people, regardless of who you voted for, regardless of what your political views are. We're there to serve you and to guide you, and if you need help or representation, we're there to do our best on your behalf. And so if you want to call in, the switchboard number is 225-3432, 225-3432. And of course, Freedom Radio continues to be broadcast at FM 91.1 Demerara, 90.5 Berbice, and 90.7 Essequibo. And as I said to you before on several programs, Mirror is now online. It is the oldest surviving newspaper in Guyana. It's about 66 years now. And so you can also look it up on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Weekend Mirror News, and you should be able to see the articles and read it free online. There's no subscription. Last week, my colleague Bishop provided and discussed with you information we received in response to questions we'd asked the Minister of Legal Affairs and the Minister of Public Health in regards to, for example, the Sussex Street bond, how much it was costing, the cost of the 6 prosecutors that the government has hired, and other questions along that line, including the Law Reform Commission, and discovered that they had rented a building at $800,000 a month, and commission's not set up, so what are we paying for? And so you learned from him about the terrible wastage of money taking place by this government, and nothing to show for this extravagance. And the week before last, we looked at the local government system, local government elections, and the mischief afoot at the Ministry of Communities and APNU AFC government with regards to the upcoming local government elections. And so, mischief afoot, remember that. Vulcan announcing by Gazette order on June the 8th, 2018, the list of 81 local authorities, which included 1 township and 8 NDCs. He seemed to have omitted one Anai NDC that he'd gazetted on June the 1st. Now, you know the APNU AFC got slaughtered at the March 2016 local government elections, as the PPP won over 65% of the local authorities at the March 2016 elections. And with 6 tied local authorities, 1 municipality and 5 NDCs. You know the minister, in violation of the law, appointed APNU chairpersons and mayor in all of the 6 tied local authorities, and the PPP has taken the matter to court, where it has still not been heard. And we've raised this issue several times in 2016 and 2017. And clearly, on the eve of the 2020 elections, APNU will not want a repeat of the 2016 results, right? We're right. That's a logical assumption. So what are they doing about it? Working hard to persuade people to vote for them? Spending some of the $267 billion plus of the 2018 budget to improve the conditions of the people in the local authorities? No, they aren't. What is clear now, especially after the debate in the National Assembly on June the 25th, 2018, on the Local Authorities Elections Amendment Bill, that this government will do anything, including amending a law, while a matter is in court to cover their tracks. It is also clear that the inclusion of a new township, making it 10 now, including 4 in the interior, Mabaruma, Lethem, Bartica, and now the 4th one, Madhya, out of the 10, and 9 new NDCs, of which 3 are in the interior and riverine areas, whilst they've also reduced the number of constituencies by 16 in 14 existing NDCs. Most of those were won by the People's Progressive Party in the 2016 elections. This all becomes now part of the grand plan of the government to interfere in the local government elections and try to improve their lot at the 2018 elections. While, of course, a double whammy. There's simultaneously, by including titled Amerindian villages, and we raised this 2 weeks ago, which is against the law. There's no such provision, that in fact they are going to then be getting a second agenda item done, and that is to control the Amerindian villages, majority of whom have voted for the PPPC. The reduction, though, of 16 constituencies, because remember, every local authority is made up of constituencies, and each one of those constituencies has a constituency candidate who represents that particular constituency. So in Georgetown, there are 15 constituencies, and so you have one for each one of the 15 constituencies who will be elected. There may be other contestants, but only one will be elected as a first past the post. And then you have the PR list that gives you the other 50%, the other 15 seats. And so when you take a local authority and you reduce the number of seats, reduce the number of constituencies, what happens? It's called gerrymandering, and that is that, say for example, a constituency is now removed, so there are less seats in the NDC or municipality, that it means that constituency boundaries now have to include or other constituencies have to include the area that you're now removing. And so that is where GCOM comes in, that has to redefine the boundaries of these existing NDCs. And why would they do that? And as I said, it's called gerrymandering, where you may not rig the election at the ballot, but you're going to rig it in terms of how you redraw the boundaries of these constituencies to ensure that if you include a constituency that is, you remove a constituency that voted heavily for the PPC and now incorporate it into another constituency, included that had a heavy APNU vote, then the PPP votes will then suddenly decline. So this is called gerrymandering, and even in the United States and other places there have been big court cases on this kind of issue where it is felt they're attempting to disenfranchise voters and to predict the results by more than persuading the voters to vote for them. So, and as I've said before in the program, Amerindian village councils are separate and distinct from the local authorities. They're another separate layer of government and governance, and they're provided for in the Amerindian Act. And in fact, in 2006, when the Amerindian Act was brought in, the Local Democratic Organs Act was amended at the same time to remove any council that is in an Amerindian community from the local democratic organs. And that act, the Local Democratic Organs, deals with local authorities, municipalities, and NDCs. And so in 2006, this was removed completely. And therefore, what the minister is doing by including Amerindian title lands and communities in NDCs and in municipalities is against the law. But once again, Minister Bolkan seems to not have a problem with breaking the law, despite going to court and where we're stuck with matters sitting there for a long time. But there's another issue that we also have to deal with, and that is that creating a local authority in the laws of Ghana, local government, although in the 1970s, 123 areas were listed and in some cases demarcated for possible creation of NDCs and municipalities, sorry, 1980, that in fact only 60 odd were named after the 1980 constitutional changes. And of course, the first election of those new NDCs was in 1994. There were no elections after that was done. There were many areas that either were not listed in the 123 areas for possible NDCs and municipalities. They were outside of that completely, and under the law, they were governed directly by central government, and those people did not pay tax, they were not taxable, and so on. By including now, creating more and more NDCs and municipalities, the issue that comes to the fore, outside of all the gerrymandering and the grand plan and the mischief afoot, as I'm calling it, of Mr. Bulkan, is another issue. One does not name an area, an NDC or municipality, unless it has certain sustainability, that it can move forward, that it can sustain itself. Because you have to remember, Mr. Granger has said that these bodies that are local authorities have to be able to raise their own money and to be much more self-sufficient. Being said, having said that, therefore, how can you create an NDC, as they have done on June the 8th, 2018, an NDC called Maruka Providence, which is near the mouth of the Pomeroon River. It is really swampy land with a very small population. On what basis could that be an NDC, unless they happen to be people that the government believes may or may not vote for them? But it will not, it has no sustainability. Whereas if you look at places like Diamond, which is still part of an NDC, the Diamond Housing Scheme, the Diamond area. In fact, Diamond has grown into what is called a peri-urban situation, and therefore with a hospital, fire station, police station, banks, mall, restaurants, health center, etc., that this is now has the facilities and the capacity to be able to become a town. Of course, they would not want to declare, the Diamond Grove area a township, but they've gone to create Madhya, Bartica, Lethem, and Mabruma. These have some capacity, but they're under duress in terms of the capacity to manage themselves. And of course, built into it means that they, at some point, are going to tax their people. Because NDCs and municipalities' only main source of money is from taxation. And we'll come to that and show what's going on in Bartica, where the main source of money for the Bartica Town Council has been shut down by Minister Brooms. So that is what is going on in local government. The minister, despite putting out putting out the list of new NDCs on June the 8th, has made no real public announcement of this, nor has he named the boundaries of these new areas. So that the boundaries may have been there in 1980, but he's got to redefine each one, because we clearly saw in October 2015 that when he changed Lethem and Mabruma and Bartica from being neighbor democratic councils to townships, they changed the boundaries of those areas to incorporate what in a number of cases were Amerindian villages, which do not, as I said, fall into the local authority system. When they extended the boundaries of Anna Regina and Curviton, also in October 2015, they had to come out with the boundaries. So up to now, the minister has not named the boundaries of these new areas. There's been no prior consultation with these communities that are now being called NDCs, whether in Amerindian areas or non-Amerindian areas. I don't even know if some of the areas that are listed are even aware that they are now going to be given NDC status. What it means, however, is that the GCOM has to take those boundaries and the minister's declaration of the number of seats in each of these new NDCs and the number of constituents, and then create the constituency boundaries so that wherever you're voting, you know where to vote, and if you can be a candidate. Of course, in the areas where minister has taken away constituencies, it means GCOM has to also go back and redefine the constituencies, the boundaries. As of today, July 5th, the minister has done nothing of the kind, and therefore I don't know what GCOM is going to do. And of course, these areas are supposed to have elections for NDCs and municipalities for local government elections in 2018. And I believe that's where part of the mischief is to create confusion, a rush, and less time to involve the communities and where their boundaries are. That is why Bishop and myself, last week and this week, are repeatedly calling on Guyanese to pay attention to the continuous registration cycle, which ends on July 8th. Today is the 5th, and may very well be the last continuous registration cycle for this year. We keep saying to you, the citizens, check your name, make sure it's spelled correctly. Check your national ID card number on the list. Is it correct? Make sure that persons in your household, relatives and so on, who are 14 years and over are going to be registered, with particular emphasis on those who are 17 plus who will be eligible to vote in 2018 and obviously to vote in 2020. We've also been telling you that if you've moved to a new address, make sure that you go in and do your transfer. You do not have to go back to the area where you were living. You go to the centers nearest to you now and do your transfer into the area where you're living now. You have to remember that in local government elections, you can only vote if you're living in that constituency. It also means that if you want to be a candidate, you have to be registered in that constituency and be present. And then, of course, between July 8th and July 15th, if any person has died in your family or relatives and so on, please encourage them to take the death certificates to the nearest GCOM registration center and to make an objection so that name is removed from the voters list. You can only do it with the death certificate, so it's important that you have access to that. But we're very concerned about making sure that the dead people come off the list, because we have some other information we talked about a couple of weeks ago about identity documents being given out to persons who are being trafficked, and that there may very well be people's names on the list who are dead, and only GRO would know who are the dead people and GCOM would know the dead people. So if we want, in the 2018 local government elections, which are coming up, we don't know the exact date. One minister says December, one minister says November. We'll see. And we also have the 2020 general and local regional elections. We have to take both elections very seriously and to be able to recognize that if we want to transform our country, we want to preserve the gains we had made up to 2015, then we have to ensure that we are registered as voters on the voters list, and that we do our transfer so we can vote both in the local government elections and also the general elections. And we need to make sure that we go out and vote, that we're there and we make our voices heard, that we do not want APNU AFC back in this government anymore, not at the local level, not at the national level. And of course, we tell you every week, we have to monitor GCOM like a hawk, and the electoral processes before the election, on election day, in the count, and afterwards, because the whole process is one we have to make sure that there is no tampering with the integrity of the electoral system. Well, let's move to a new sector we haven't dealt with for a little while, and that is the health sector. The health sector is in serious trouble, and if you don't believe me, let's look at two articles from yesterday. In fact, in my opinion, as a former Minister of Health, the health sector is on the verge of collapse. As usual, the minister is again denying that there's any drug shortage or shortage of medical supplies or any problem at all. And of course, the second issue I'll refer to is that they deny everything, that there's a problem, and then blame everybody else for the problem by intimidating and bullying. So everywhere you go in the country, whether it is Georgetown Hospital, clinics, coastal areas, interior areas, there is a drug shortage. There are shortages of medical supplies. And this is not going on recently. From 2016, this has been a problem. They cannot handle it. They cannot fix it. And there's a reason why they can't fix it, and not for the reasons they're giving. If you go into the interior locations, it is dreadful. People in our marine areas can't, okay, the center doesn't have it, or the health hut doesn't have it. They can walk to the nearest pharmacy. We're talking about walk. And so it's unconscionable that this Ministry of Public Health has the highest budget ever for the last 3 years, ever, for the purchase of drugs and medical supplies. And yet, there is dire shortages of critical drugs in different parts of the country. The fact that the doctors and staff had to go out on strike in Skeldon last year is an indication. It's fine to say you have health workers and you have doctors and nurses there. If they don't have the basic things that they need to do their work, then they cannot function. It's not just about dispensing a tablet. It's about a range of levels of care that require them to have the proper facilities, sterilization equipment, their gloves, their masks, the instruments that they need to do, if it is minor surgery, major surgery, reagents to test blood. It's a range of things that allow the nurses and doctors to do what they can do. However, the government and the minister is in denial. And that denial is now going on, whether it was George Norton, whether it's Valda Lawrence. And of course, you must remember there are two ministers in health, and that is Dr. Karen Cummings. So there are two ministers, and still they can't get it right. One of the articles was in Kaiser News yesterday, called Health Ministry's Pharmacy Director Addresses Drug Shortage. And he says, let's establish from the outset that there is no country that can achieve 100% supply of the medicines at any given time. Guyana is no different from the other states. This is what the pharmacy director, Mr. O'Neill Atkins, has to say. And of course, at the time he was addressing what he described as media sensationalism, which he said is undermining trust and progress in the health sector. He appealed for an end to the rush to judgment mentality on issues on this sensitive sector. And of course, I'm continuing to read from the article in Kaiser News in case anyone feels I'm defaming the man. Atkins' appeal comes from the background of what he claimed is the constant erroneous complaints about shortage and stockouts of drugs and medical supplies across the public health system of our country. He said that periodically there will be shortages, but not at a level to jeopardize the lives of those seeking medical help in the public health sector. In the pharmaceutical sector, officials still struggle to forecast accurately patients' needs in the 10 administrative reasons. Of course, he went into a long thing to show a Canadian study that said they had 10% shortage in the drug in the Canadian health sector. Canadian health sector is completely different from ours. It is not funded by the state as ours is. It's a completely different health system, and where they do have shortages, many times it has to do with shortages of drugs that are even globally. But it doesn't compromise the care that is given to people because they give alternatives. What is the solution that the gentleman comes up with? He goes on to say, he blames the regional health officers, for the time lapse from ordering to the time patients receive their quota of medicines. And he talks about that the Ministry of Public Health keeps a buffer stock in its system to cater for anticipated delays in the supply process. And then he goes on to say that the 10 regions have legislative permission to procure limited quantities of drugs and medical supplies to address the gaps between low stock and when the material management unit of the ministry sends in supplies. Mr. Atkins goes on to say that Guyanese to trust their efforts in the Ministry of Health to improve the system. Please be patient and reciprocate, saying we need a kinder, gentle, and healthier society. Well, Mr. Atkins, if you're sick and you need help, where do you go? You go to hospital, you go to health centers. And if you're poor, you have no other choice. You can't go to the private hospitals. So what patience do you want from people? People are suffering, they're ill, they're sick, and they can't get basic things. Your diabetic drugs are not available and they're expensive outside. The heart patients and high blood pressure and so on. In parts of the interior, it is so dread that you don't have enough antibiotic medicines for children who are suffering from respiratory illnesses. Most of the health centers have a lot of stuff for gas or indigestion. I don't know why. We seem to be such a gassy country that the Ministry of Public Health seems to be able to buy every health center piles of bottles to do with indigestion and gas. But you don't have your basic things of cough syrups and creams and malaria drugs and TB drugs and drugs for children who are suffering from respiratory illnesses, which in times when in the seasons come in and rain comes in, that's when you see an upsurge in children getting ill. You have a shortage of anti-diarrheal tablets and medicine for diarrhea. These are some of the basic things that are required in the health facilities at the basic level. Worse yet when you come to the public hospital, which is your last tertiary referral hospital where certain basic things are missing. Reagents, people having to wait for 2 days in the emergency room to get a bed in the hospital, a person who's bleeding and who is ill and who is dying. What kind of management are we talking about in this country? It is unconscionable. But Mr. Atkins isn't satisfied with what I just read. No. He goes on. He goes on. He goes on to point out that, and let me quote again from the article, because anybody's saying I'm defaming the man. Meanwhile, public sector physicians must explore more counseling opportunities as a strategy to manage patients' expectations and not succumb to prescription pressure, which is an international phenomenon. Atkins said over-prescription or needless prescribing does not hold therapeutic benefit, nor is it pharmacoeconomically sound. He says to the doctors, be more judicious with your prescription patterns. He counseled, noting that physicians' reference for certain brand of medications can mean several other drugs are undispensed and sit on shelves and expire. More rational judgment is needed in some of the regions in this regard. And of course, he goes on to say how resolute he is in solving these issues. But lastly, let us all keep sensationalism out of the health sector. It does not belong there. As I said, the problem of the acquisition of drugs and medical supplies, the distribution, and the accessibility to people is part of what the Public Health Ministry is responsible for. That's a responsibility. It's a challenge. It's not easy. But the government has been screwing it up from the beginning, and I'll come to that in a minute. Let me go to the next article. Remember, we've raised this matter in Parliament about the drug shortages in the interior locations. Minister denied it. We've raised it in different ways, denied it. We even had the exposure of walking to go and see the Sussex Street Bond during the budget debate. And remember, it was empty. But we did learn in the last sitting that $264 million has been spent in rent for a building that is not being occupied and used to store drugs. It has no capacity to store drugs anyway. But let's go to the second article to give you an idea. When they talk about sensationalism, it's really hysteria. There is hysteria in the leadership of the Ministry of Public Health, trying to cover their you-know-whats and not deal with the fact that people are suffering in this country, particularly poor people, and they're doing nothing about it, just fanning themselves and saying, oh, this is a problem that's all over the world, and the doctors must do better. But let's come to the second one, which is even worse. Public Health Ministry, and of course, as I said, they denied it in April 2016. They denied there was no problem. They've denied it in 2017. They've denied, they criticized the Skeldon Hospital medical staff for their sit-in because of shortages. Anyway, let's go to the next thing that came out in the papers. This is an article headed up Regional Health Officers pilfering drugs and medical supplies, blamed for shortages. So having said that, you know, these are the issues with Mr. Atkins, now you have the Regional Health Services Director, Dr. K. Shako, accusing regional health officers of theft and wastage of drugs and medical supplies. And again, I quote from the article that's in the papers, so no one will say I'm doing anything. They had this retreat at Lake Mainstay Resort in Region 1. Expensive, no? And According to a release from the Ministry of Public Health, the RHS director, Dr. Shako, said low circulation of critical items for patients happens because of pilfering of drugs and medical supplies in the public sector. On the issue of the theft of drugs, Shako said the RHS is aware of those behind the reprehensible behavior. She says, "We know who you are," warning participants not to be surprised when the police get involved. It goes on. The article is rather interesting. She says that the RHOs must stop the madness. When she's talking about absenteeism, she even talks about how some of the RHOs are dressed inelegantly for work, while there are others who smoke and are drunk on the job. All of this is apparently to explain the fact that we don't have drugs in the public health system. But you know, the genesis of all this is the week before. Mr. Jordan had a meeting with the different ministries and agencies to do with the implementation of their budget and preparation for 2019 budget. Now remember last year, July, Jordan was forced to say publicly that only 35% of the budget's total budget for the government had been expended as of half year. And this was a slap in his face because they had said they have to have the budget passed in December, where there are no figures for the end of the year, because they need a full 12 months to be able to implement the budget. So you're in this 6 months, you finished the 6 months, and you've only spent 35% of the budget. So I guess Mr. Jordan didn't want to be caught again this year, so what he did is do some upfront loading, as they call it, front loading. And apparently he was very critical of the health sector at these meetings they had. And so apparently he read the Riot Act, again I'm reading from the article, to various heads of budget agencies, permanent secretaries, regional heads at the Arthur Chung Convention Center. This is sometime last week. And he identified two ministries in particular that are quoted in the article. One is the health sector, and he says, "Why do we have increasing allocations to the health sector but continued drug shortages and less hospital inspections than previous years? Health accounts for 12.5% of the national budget in 2018. What intervention within the budget proposal will resolve this conundrum of increasing allocations but declining availability?" Not Teixeira said that, Mr. Jordan, the Minister of Finance, said that. And he also went on to talk about the education sector and the public infrastructure ministries. He said, in his quote in the article, "Why do we have increasing allocations to education, but still less than 50% of our children are passing math and English? Education accounts for 17.2% of the national budget in 2018. What in the budget proposal will resolve this? Why do we have increasing allocations for maintenance and infrastructure development, yet our public sector infrastructure program is filled with requests to rehabilitate existing infrastructure?" So Jordan reads the Riot Act to the ministries. The ministries run back and tell their ministers, because the ministers obviously have heard that he's lambasting their ministries, and they then call in their heads of department and put a licking upon them, and then now those head of departments now go to the next layer, the RHOs, and attack them and bully them and intimidate them, threatening to lock them up. There's a process in the ministry and in of how you deal with people who are absent and not functioning, and there are also methodologies of how you deal with people who are found pilfering. But that's how the cookie's crumbling, my dear friends. The cookie's crumbling, as the Americans say. And so here is a ministry. It is so mind-boggling. It is so unbelievable and brazen that the Ministry of Public Health, which has been under public scrutiny on the purchase of drugs outside of the tender process, on the drug bond at 6th Street, which they spent $264 million for rent, for building not being used, for a ministry that had 80% of the 2017 budget was spent without going to tender, and that's over $2 billion. So calculate 80% of that $2 billion. And then you have Public Hospital, also with another $2 billion for drugs and medical supplies, who also, over 80%, did not go to public tender. And they're threatening RHOs for pilfering. It is so, this is what you call diversionary tactics. This is called throwing out red herrings. Now, let's be logical. Let's give an example. They $600 million of drugs was purchased without going to tender. The ministry did ask the National Tender Administration Board, NPTAB, sorry, National Procurement and Tender Administration Board, for permission to waiver going to tender. The NPTAB said, no, this $600 million, you have to go to tender. The ministry said, too bad. They went ahead and gave the tender to Anson McCall, over $600 million. This led to the PPC having a so-called investigation and so on. $600 million. Dr. Norton, when he was in charge of public health, returned $600 million to the Treasury at the end of 2016. So $600 million of drugs and medical supplies were not purchased. In the Ministry of Public Health, you order, there's a disease pattern. So you know what are the basic diseases you're dealing with in Guyana, the basic kind of morbidity issues you're dealing with in the health sector. The surgical needs, the theater needs, the orthopedic needs, the gynecological and obstetric needs, the pediatric needs. You know all that. There's a profile. It doesn't change radically. Even with HIV/AIDS, it hasn't changed radically. You know what are the drugs of the last 10, 15, 20 years you need to bring in. Now, obviously, drugs change over time, and some may get better, and so on. You amend. But there's something called the National Formulary that decides what are the drugs that the Ministry of Public Health must provide to its people. And it also defines what is given to a community health worker, what is given to a health hut, what is given to a health center, a district hospital, a regional hospital, and the tertiary hospital, Georgetown. So if you have bought over $2 billion between public hospital and Ministry of Health, almost $4 billion, of which 80% of that was purchased without going to tender. And this young lady is talking about pilfering. That's the reason why you have shortages out there. How much are these guys fetching out? You're talking about billions of dollars of drugs and medical supplies. You're not talking about, pilfering has existed in the Ministry of Health, yes. You would have health centers where someone take up a couple tubes of ointment and a couple of bottles of this and a couple of bottles of that. If they're accusing the regional health officers, and I hope the regional health officers will not stay silent and be put up as the fall guys in what is a ministry that's being hopelessly managed, is filled with corruption, and doesn't give a damn about the ordinary people of our country. Seriously don't care. So it's all about what they're doing is what you call CYA. They're doing CYA. Whether it is that a child dies because they weren't given the correct medicine or they weren't given the medicine at all. Look at the number of women who are dying in delivery, giving birth to babies, or afterwards, maternal deaths. What they're not saying is, why are the babies dying in neonatal unit at public hospital? What are the cause of those deaths? Yes, neonatal babies that are put there sometimes are weak, or they're sickly, or they have other problems that may be congenital, so they need special care. But the death rate amongst that group of kids has gone up remarkably. Why? Is it that they don't have access to all the things that are needed for these babies who are incubators, are supposed to be incubators? Or is it that they're not sanitizing the place? Is it infected? Is it contaminated? What is going on? And I remember when we were in government, every time there was a maternal death, there was a screaming in the media and by women's organizations, and I believe they were right. No maternal death should be accepted in this country, not in 2018. No, no, no. And yet, the women's organizations are all quiet. The media doesn't seem to pay much attention to it. And yet, People are dying. Why? Why does someone have to sit in the emergency ward for 2 days who is ill, seriously ill, to get a bed? These are people who cannot afford to go to a private hospital. And whilst private hospitals are seeing an increase in the number of people coming to them, people borrowing, people selling something to go, but seriously, the public health sector takes 12-point-something% of the annual budget of our country, and particularly in 2018. Where, oh where, are the drugs going? As a former Minister of Health, I know that the drugs are ordered in advance. So if you're in the ministry, you don't wait for sometime the request to come in. You know you have patterns and it's all computerized, and you can check the usage, and therefore you know. You may not know all the drugs, but you know that if there are a list of 100, there are at least 70 that are used all the time. And so you have to order 3 to 6 months in advance. The drugs you're buying this year is really for next year. What did they do the last 2 years with the money they spent on drugs? Why is it that when I go into Region 9, and I meet a health worker from a villager, and I happen to be in a vehicle that actually helped to bring the drugs to her, because the Ministry of Health people in the region don't deliver the drugs to the community health workers. They expect it to come out from some village, come out and fetch their stuff, take it back in and pay for it. These are people earning minimum wage. And so we took in the drugs that were sitting in Lethem for a month or so. The lady had sent in cribs, the request, twice in 2016. I went in June 2017, and that's when she's getting her first set of drugs for the year 2016 and 2017. And this ministry unconscionably goes around saying, there's no drug shortage. And if there is, it's the drugs, the doctors are overprescribing, it's the RHOs who are pilfering. Utter nonsense. And I think this would enrage you as much as it enrages me, because when you see the amount of money they're wasting and pilfering, $264 million spent on a drug bond, $600 million without any procurement, and nothing happens. So let's go now. Health, I'm telling you, is on the verge of like imploding. I have the greatest respect for the nurses and doctors, technicians, lab, pharmacy, who work in the public health sector. I've worked with them. I was a Minister of Health. And I know the difficulties. When we got in 92, we didn't have the money. And we had to stretch and to use everything possible to get an improvement in the health sector. And I know that my colleagues, Henry Jeffrey, Leslie, Dr. Leslie Ramsamy, Dr. Ramsaran, all worked their butts off to try to improve the conditions and the quality of healthcare and the accessibility to healthcare for people, in particular the poor and vulnerable, in particular women and children and the elderly and Amerindian communities. All of this is unraveling. All of this is unraveling, and trust me, it's unraveling. And so they can sit in their cocoon and say, no, there's no drug shortage. But by the way, why is it then they have a health insurance in Ireland? Why don't they go to the public hospital too, if it's no shortage? Let's go to the next sector. Because we haven't dealt with these sectors for a little while. We've been dealing with local government and GCOM and the economy. Let's go to next sector, teachers. Teachers' salaries are still hanging there even after the task force that was set up in November by the President as a result of the teachers threatening to go on strike in November 2017. Task force only got set up with agreement on terms of reference, the terms of reference of the task force, sometime in January, February. The task force finished its work and submitted its recommendations to the minister and assumed the cabinet in the last 2 months. Cabinet is still considering the matter. Watch what's happening in the health sector, which I gave you all this spiel about. It will happen in the education sector as well. The government will run its mouth on the teachers next and blame them for the low pass rates for English and maths. And just like the health sector staff, if the teachers have not had a salary increase for the last 3 years and expected to work with not enough materials and textbooks, etc., and where teachers use their own money to go and buy materials to make teaching aids for their children, go into any of the stationery stores in Guyana, including Giftland Mall. You will see teachers in buying materials, their cardboard and their colors and their crayon and their paints, to make teaching aids for their children. And it comes out of their pocket. Because the children, particularly at nursery and primary, need these teaching aids to help them to recognize and comprehend what's going on. Where parents have to pay VAT on educational materials, where the cash grass is gone, and the uniform voucher allowance, the uniform allowance voucher, is not given out in a number of areas. In fact, at the Regional Touche House conference, it came out that for last 2 to 3 years, the Amrina communities in Region 9 have not received either uniform material and or school uniform allowances, and they feel they've been robbed. And I think they're right. They have been robbed. Their children have been robbed. And so, again, the government cannot run this country. They cannot manage this country. Total confusion. All sorts of people at the top getting big jobs. So you thought it was bad under the PPP? Check and see what's going on in the APNU AFC. We have to stand by the teachers for their demands for better salaries and working conditions. Under our government, we had a 3-year agreement. It expired, and the teachers have been trying with the new government, APNU AFC, to get a similar deal or better. Of course better, because many of them have trust in the APNU AFC coalition. But it's 3 years, and 3 years are too long to wait. So I hope that the teachers will not sit there idly by and be blamed like the health people are being blamed for the shortage of drugs because of pilfering. Let's go to Bartica now. You know, I did say 2 weeks ago about the closure of the sand pit at Bartica. And in fact, on May the 21st, it was reported in the press that Minister Brooms had closed down the quarry, sand quarry, at 5 Miles Bartica, managed by the Bartica Town Council. And that is now 6 weeks ago. And in fact, I was interested to see reported in the press yesterday that the Mayor of Bartica, Gifford Marshall, who is an APNU person, explained that the municipality has met the requirements that were demanded to improve the working conditions of the sand pits. However, these facilities are yet to be reopened. He says one of our agencies responsible for mining came into Bartica and closed what we would refer to as one of our sand pits. To date, that facility remains closed, and of course, it is causing some major challenges for the municipality. Despite the municipality would have met the requirements that are demanded by the agency, this is the GGMC, that facility remains closed. He noted that while the municipality is affected, the other challenges come from the fact that all works have been stalled until the matter is resolved and the sand pits are up and running. It is a situation that he said is considered unbearable. I'm quoting from Mayor Marshall and what's in the papers. Of course, he goes on to say, quote, that means all government projects are on hold. That means that private contractors cannot work. The banks are calling on us and asking us what's happening, and it's a situation that's getting unbearable, to say the least. So, Bartica, the model town, Granger's model green model town. You close down one of the main areas for employment. In fact, as a result of the closure of the sand pit for 6 weeks, 300 jobs have been affected. The men who work in the sand pits, the truckers who move the sand, and those who are working on projects that need sand. Over 300 workers. Multiply that by 5 minimum for a family, you're talking about 1,500 people. What's the population of Bartica again? Small community. So this has terrible repercussions for people's lives and their children. And so I hope this is a lesson to Bartica people, that a lot of what is going on is not for the betterment of Bartica. The roads are in terrible condition. Terrible condition. And yet we hear about Bartica being the model town. You have a boulevard, you have a radio station which is not functioning, etc. But no work, the mining community is in trouble. So we've said a lot of things today, and so I'll give you a couple minutes on the phone before I wrap up, because there are a lot of other issues to raise, but it isn't time today. So, as we were saying, and as I'm waiting for a call to come in, because a number of calls were coming in when I was speaking, that what's going on with water. Water rates will be going up in October and again in October 2019. And this is not just the rates, but other services attached to water. And so, again, as we report, we've been raising every week about the gas prices, that up to now the government has done nothing in relation to the gas prices, no response about anything, whilst at the same time I have pointed out in this program that maybe the reason why they don't want to do anything about the gas prices is that, as is suspected, that the fuel smuggling enterprise is connected to very top people in the government, and therefore they would lose out if the government were to do what is right, and that is to reduce the excise tax of the importation of fuel. So, my friends, where's the good life? Where's the good life gone? It becomes more and more an illusion that seems to be drifting away from us as each day passes under the APNU AFC government. I have said repeatedly, almost every week, that let's keep our eye on the appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice. Looks like the President is angling to do what he did with the appointment of the Chairman of GCOM, violate the Constitution and appoint his own Chancellor and Chief Justice. He again asserted a few weeks ago that his support for Justice Benjamin, and has delayed meeting with the Leader Opposition, having announced he would have done so 3 weeks ago now. So, again, I don't believe there'll be a meeting for quite a while that he will call for the Leader Opposition. Obviously, he has to consult the Leader Opposition on the appointees to do with the Public Service Commission and the Police Service Commission. In the Police Service Commission, he has to consult with the Leader Opposition from among the 4 names that came from Parliament, which one would be the chairman. I have no doubt which one Mr. Granger wants. And in relation to the Public Service Commission, there he has to also consult with the Leader Opposition on who should be the chairman and what are additional names that should come from the Leader Opposition. Of course, we believe that Mr. Granger is absolutely predictable and he'll go in the same direction he's been going all the time, no change. We keep warning that this government is on the path to authoritarianism, and these examples we relate to you on each of these programs demonstrate this is where Guyana is heading. We have an incompetent, inept government that does not manage the economy, that has given itself enormous sums of money, which they cannot manage, and in which the area has become ripe with corruption. The problem is not only that they're corrupt and inept and incompetent, is that they fully believe that they're entitled to remain there. They're entitled to do whatever they want to do. They do not respond to any suggestion, any criticism, anything that could make things be corrected, rectified. They bulldoze it through because they believe they're entitled to. They've got the power, and to hell with everybody else. The poor people of this country, the level of poverty is increasing all the time. And so they seem to be inured to what is going on. I'm getting signals that I have 5 minutes left. And so we believe that, how do we show our power as a people? We show our power in not being silent, in being able to, through our views, letters to the editors, call-in programs, emails, Facebook, social media, that we make our views known. We use our members of Parliament to raise issues in Parliament. We go to the neighbour democratic councils and raise issues and have them try to rectify and deal with our needs as a people. Municipalities. But when it comes to elections, that's where our power as a people lie. That we can show once again in 2018 that the government, the party that people want to run this country is the PPPC, as it did in 2016, and that it did in 2015, the country that runs the regions is the PPP, and that the Amerindian Tushau's majority are supportive of the PPP. So the government continues to sit on quicksand and cannot pull the popular base at all. So what do? Let us show our strength in 2018, and let us show APNU that they're not wanted, that they're failing left, right, and center. It's 3 years now. It's not the first 6 months. It's not the first 3 months. It's not the first year. It is 3 years in which the budget for 3 years is almost $1 trillion. And what have we got to show for that as a country? It is time that by 2020 they're out of this government completely. So let us not be silent. You have a blessed weekend. And you take care of yourselves and don't drink and drive, and enjoy your family and your loved ones. And so, as usual, and struggle we shall, and silent we shall not be. Silence is the greatest enemy to democracy. Silence makes those in power think they can get away with anything. Silence helps those who want more control and less democracy, those who want to move this country to a police state. And at the next election, people will make their votes count again. And there will be the PPPC in government once again. And you know what? We'll have to start all over again, as in 1992, to reconstruct, to put this economy back on a firm and stable footing, and restore the programs which help the poor and the vulnerable, and those at risk, and to restore the independence of the judiciary and the legislature from executive interference. We will do that. 2020, mark my words. You have a great weekend, and you take care of yourselves. Bye-bye. Ciao.